And we're back. Episode 3, Hyde Park Barracks, Sydney, Australia, also known as the Sydney Barracks. So we left off with this item of interest, this curious uniform. The Canary Men, as they were called. These were convicts who were a high risk for flight. No pun intended, the Canary Men. The canary reference is obviously this ridiculous multi-paneled uniform. And this is inflicting not only mental but emotional punishment, humiliation, which is part and parcel to the larger repertoire of punishment. Let's move to the next panel for discussion. As we mentioned in the previous episodes, these are storytelling institutions, these prison museums. And they also rely on a technique of performance, and that is to engage the visitors, the tourists, to participate in this drama. And let's turn to some thick description. Now, that's a term that sociologists who study cultural phenomenon, cultural sociology, whereby they engage in an in-depth analysis and interpretation of the subject at hand. And what I want to introduce in this frame is to draw attention to these leg irons, these shackles. And visitors are invited to try them on. And this is part of the experience of visiting these type of storytelling institutions, is that the visitors want to engage in what I call safe contact. And that is they want to participate in something that appears to be dangerous, but in doing so they are not harmed. Safe contact. Now, these leg irons, these shackles, in their original incarnation, were used to punish convicts. And these shackles were attached for prolonged periods of time, weeks, months, to the extent that the leg iron itself would rub against the ankle repeatedly, to the extent of peeling away the flesh, and even going so far as exposing the shin bone. Very painful, chronic pain. Many convicts would attempt to strike a deal with the guard who was about to attach these shackles. It says, "I'll make a deal with you. I'll trade you the cat of nine tails," which is shown in this particular image. "Give me 12 of these lashes as a substitute for the leg irons." And that gives you an idea of how painful these leg irons were once they were attached. Now, visitors don't really know this unless they have studied the history of penology in Australia and elsewhere. For them, this is just part of the performance. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just pointing it out as one of these almost subconscious, phenomenological experiences in visiting a prison museum. Now, I'm also engaging in another technique in storytelling, which is foreshadowing. I'm giving you a little bit of information now, and then we will return to a thick description a bit later. And that is this device here, which is the cat of nine tails. These convicts were building a society, a European-based, in its vision, city of Sydney, Australia. They were expanding in somewhat of a manifest destiny outwards from the harbor to the Blue Mountains. So, for all practical purposes, it would be strategically difficult to transport the prisoners, the convicts, out to a work site well beyond what was the city limits, or what was to become the city limits, and then return them to the Sydney barracks at night, and then repeat the ritual, the routine, the next day. So rather, they would transport the convicts in these portable jails. So they would work the day, their details, throughout the day where sunlight was available, and at night they would lock them up in this portable jail with a Bible and a chamber pot as a toilet. And then as the work crew, as the work gang progressed on that particular project, they would also have this portable jail being hauled by mules or horses. These items on display are a reminder that carpentry, coopering, various craft skills were being developed for a convict population from rural England, rural Ireland, that really didn't have a lot of these skills once they arrived to Australia. So there was an intense, extensive training program. And this part of the tour is a reminder of work. And you can be a little bit philosophical if you want. I remember a phrase that one of my professors mentioned decades ago in a class, and he referred to man as maker. And that is what makes us who we are, is what we do, what we make. Man as maker. We feel a sense of pride and satisfaction when we make something. And this was part of the almost unspoken incentives in building the city of Sydney. These craftsmen were taking pride in their work. And over the course of their months or years as a convict, and then once they were emancipated, meaning they were free to live in the city of Sydney, they then reapplied these skills to build hotels, restaurants, pubs, and more pubs, and more pubs. Can't have enough of those. But great pride in building these institutions of Sydney. Let's move on. Once again, we see a streamlined interior that speaks to Greenway. He was a convict who, as legend has it, was very well off in England. And he was more than just a con man. He was into forgery and so on and so forth. And so it would be very unusual for someone who's engaged in a white-collar crime, if you want to call it, even off-white, if you want to call it, something as a low-level offense such as forgery. It would be very unusual for someone like that, of that social status, to be sentenced to transportation. But as the story goes, and again, this is a storytelling institution, and this is how we describe people who were confined or who contributed to the emergence of the Sydney Barracks as the architect. Apparently he had crossed the wrong people in England and forged some documents, and they appeared before the magistrate, these victims, and they issued a very forceful argument that this guy should be placed on one of these vessels and transported to down under. Now you can imagine the look on his face when he realized that he had gotten in well over his head and wound up in the Sydney Barracks. But then he continued his craft, and that is he was able to convince the governor of Australia, of New South Wales, that he had the skills, he had the vision to draw blueprints that could be used to build the Sydney Barracks. And that's the Greenway story, Francis Greenway. And I'm sure there are many other stories about him, but that's just one. Now we're going to pause, get a cup of coffee, come back, and continue our tour.